With just a very general overview picture of the maritime activities in the Baltic Sea area. As you can imagine, there are plenty, and in a minute I will also demonstrate to you a nice video visualizing different activities that are ongoing in the Baltic Sea. As quite widely is recognized, the Baltic Sea is one of the most busiest seas in the world with regards to shipping, of course, but with regards to many other activities as well. And with maritime activities in the Baltic Sea, we are considering not only those that occur at sea itself, but also on the coast, of course. And that is why we will talk during today quite a lot actually about coasts and not that much about, for example, shipping. But this is an important issue to cover, and I would like to introduce you to that especially. I would draw your attention to the publication that was released by Helsinki Commission, I think 2 years ago, and that's the integrated assessment of maritime activities in the Baltic Sea area. So you see the well, the cover of the publication in the left-hand upper corner. I will provide a link also to that one, so you can easily click and go and see, because it's a very thorough one, and it explains basically the situation about all those activities that are presented here on this slide. And the picture on this slide is also from this very publication. And as you can see on this slide, even shipping or shipping related activities, they are also very numerous and diverse. So they range from port activities and handling of cargoes, different types of cargoes, and also the shore-ship interaction. Of course, the shipping per se with navigation across the Baltic Sea, that's another very important factor and important industry in the region. We have different types of ships that are going across the Baltic Sea, and at each single moment there are approximately 3,000 ships flying different flags across the Baltic Sea. And this is not including, for example, small recreational crafts, sailing boats, yachts, fishing boats, and so on and so forth. Well, certain fishing boats are, of course, included, but not all. There are also other activities related to the use of the sea, and that's, for example, aquaculture. We don't have so many aquaculture farms in the region, but there are still quite a few, and especially in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and now the sector is also growing in Russia, and probably in some other countries like Estonia also has plans for aquaculture development. There are as well other installations, and surprise, surprise, but we do have even oil rigs or oil platforms in the Baltic Sea. Currently, there are only three of those. But in my presentation, I will actually talk about potential plans that we are not very happy about for oil exploration in the Baltic Sea. There are also, of course, offshore wind farms, and those are becoming more and more numerous, and you're quite well aware of those. They are probably more visible on the western and southwestern parts of the Baltic Sea, close to Denmark, close to Sweden, Germany. Not so many perhaps in many other parts of the Baltic Sea, but anyway, they are there. And of course, there are plenty of impacts connected to those activities that I have just mentioned. And those are also presented here on this picture, including, for example, different discharges of various types of wastes. And some of those discharges are allowed, some of those are not allowed, and those are considered as illegal. Of course, there are accidents happening from time to time, and those may cause oil spills. Again, deliberate that are quite small, or accidental that may be quite big. There are other impacts related to fishing, not fishing, but shipping. And also those are, for example, anti-fouling paints. And that's a special type of paint that is covering hulls of ships in order to prevent overgrowth of plants and animals on the hulls. Those paints usually contain toxic chemicals, and they used to have quite a toxic organotin compounds included, but now they are replaced more and more. There are discharges of sewage of both gray and black waters, as they are called. In general, those are so far allowed within the Baltic Sea area according to specific circumstances and conditions. They are not allowed from passenger ships and cruise ships. So these ships should deliver their sewage waste to reception facilities and ports. But they are allowed for most of the cargo ships. And this is right now under discussion whether we should allow and keep it open as a regulated activity. And there are other issues that you already learned about, for example, underwater noise. We have talked about that, and I will not touch upon that at all. But there are plenty of other impacts and environmental effects and consequences of maritime activities, including, for example, if you think about aquaculture, then even nutrient pollution is originating, as well as hazardous substances pollution is originating from open sea cages. There are plenty of different impacts and effects that one can connect to maritime activities. But as I promised, I will show you a short video to demonstrate especially the shipping sector, because we will not be touching that later during the presentation. You probably will not hear the sound, but this is quite self-explanatory. You'll see at least the picture and video. And there is a dramatic sound, so I can support that with my oral visualization, so to speak. So, in fact, this video is based on the real data that is collected by HELCOM in so-called automatic identification system database. Each ship that is sailing across the Baltic Sea sends a signal to a coastal station to locate the ship and also allow for electronic navigation, electronic charts. So all those dots that you will see in this video, they are representing individual ships. And based on this data, it was possible to recreate this information about the passage of the ships across the Baltic domain and the busiest routes. What are the busiest routes for different types of ships? So as you see here, what are the busiest areas within the Baltic Sea? This is for Finland, and you will have a journey now across the whole Gulf of Finland and then further into the Baltic proper and towards the exit from the Baltic Sea. So you see all those dots. These are individual ships passing by at a specific moment. And you see, of course, the running time. This is based on data from 2012. But in fact, I can only imagine that this picture has been changing within the past 10 years quite severely as well, with growth of different types of ships passing by. The only difference perhaps was within the last 2 years because of COVID. And I've just heard that there was quite a significant collapse in, and downturn in passenger and cruise ship navigation across the Baltic Sea within the last 2 years. Yeah, so this is in a nutshell about the shipping situation in the Baltic Sea, and I hope you liked the video. And that's about large infrastructure projects at sea and coast. And here on this very first slide, you see two examples of extremely bad coastal management. One on the bottom is the Nord Stream 2, and that's the route across Kurgalski Peninsula
in Leningrad Oblast of Russia, very close to the Estonian border. Nature protected area of international importance, protected by 2 conventions. On the upper right picture, you see the construction site of Vistula navigation canal across Vistula Spit, a nature protected area, Natura 2000 area, protected by European law. And we will touch upon those during my presentation. But first, I would like to start with, well, why and how, unfortunately, this Pandora box of transboundary large infrastructure projects in the Baltic Sea has been opened. And of course, I should have probably started then with Öresund Bridge between Denmark and Sweden. That was probably one of the biggest projects, say 20, 30 years ago, when it has created a lot of public attention. It has created a lot of public critique about the environmental impacts assessment and what it would mean for the whole Baltic Sea. But I intentionally started with this project that is D6 oil field. I mentioned already today about 3 oil rigs that we have in the Baltic Sea, and this is one of those. This was constructed, I think, in 2004 approximately, and it has been also a very controversial and contradictory process that was opposing a lot of public outreach and outcry, with pressures from different NGOs and public groups protesting against oil extraction in the Baltic Sea. And of course, one of the reasons for that was that the oil field is located very close to the, well, rather close to the sea coast, very much on the border between Lithuania and Russia, near Kaliningrad coast, and near the UNESCO World Heritage Site, that is the transboundary national park Coronian Spit. So that was the main concern, that in case of anything happens with any operations at this rig, there will be inevitable oil pollution of the national park, of the unique nature values of Coronian Spit. And there was simply no experience, I think, at that stage on how it should have been handled. And there was another thing, of course, that Russia is not a party to the ESPO Convention on Transboundary Environmental Impact Assessment. So the environmental impact assessment for the oil rig was prepared according to Russian standards, and then Lithuania and some other countries appealed to Helsinki Commission, Helsinki Convention, stating that there should be an international procedure to assess the potential consequences of this project on the environment of the Baltic Sea. And that's why the transboundary consultations with Lithuania have commenced. And then there was also another push because, as I said, the site is located very close to UNESCO World Heritage Site, and therefore UNESCO pushed for international post-project analysis of when the rig was already erected and placed on the continental shelf, and it started its operation. Well, as a result, I can say that at least a proper risk assessment of oil spills has been carried out during this post-project analysis. Then there was also a push for extended monitoring of environmental situation around the rig, and it is ongoing for many years already. And finally, also, and surprisingly also from the industry itself, there was a proposal to set up such so-called zero discharge principle for all oil rigs in the Baltic Sea, though it has not been implemented, frankly speaking, so far. Not even on this D6 oil rig. However, what we also know that the lifetime of this rig is going to end quite soon. The resources were depleted very quickly, And now HELCOM was, after many years, informed about other potential prospects, oil prospects in the same area close to Kaliningrad. First it was about D33 field, and then suddenly it was D41, D6 South, and they are shown here on the map that is on the left-hand side bottom picture. However, there was no proper information presented again. So we are again stepping on the very same trap, because it looks like that all the information that was presented and that was submitted so far is only about Russian EIA procedure. Environmental impact assessment is again carried out only in accordance to Russian standards, and nobody has been informed about what's going on and what are the plans. However, then it has developed with some other cases, and Nord Stream 1 perhaps was, we can tentatively call it a moderate success, because with all the pressures that were put on D6 project, it has appeared very clearly that Nord Stream, as a big transboundary infrastructure project going across the whole Baltic Sea, should have undergone proper consultations with public in all the countries that will be affected, or that have been affected, in fact, by now already. And in a sense, one can say that yes, Nord Stream and Gazprom as the company, as the mother company of this enterprise, they have done quite a good job, both with regards to public relations as well as with creating a system to demonstrate that the impacts, even if the impacts were carried out and they caused certain consequences in the environment, they were at least quite closely monitored, and they are closely monitored even till now. And of course, this process and the project has been monitored quite also thoroughly by environmental NGOs, by our partners, by CCB itself as well, and of course by many, many others from both sides, from both the Russian side, Russian organizations participated, and among them many of CCB members, but also from the German side with WWF, with NABU, with BUND, Friends of the Earth Germany. They have also played a very crucial role in monitoring the construction, environmental impact assessment, and so on. The few things that general public may not know about the effects that were, in a sense, kind of hidden under the carpet. And for example, this picture on the bottom right part of the slide, you see this discharge to sea, discharge to pond. And this is the water that was discharged from the pipeline after the pipeline was already welded and put on the bottom, and when they were testing the pipeline. So the pipeline was tested with water, and water was poured into the pipeline in several places, and it was released also in several places. So the final bits of water that were discharged from the pipeline, they were discharged in Viborg Bay of the Gulf of Finland. And you can see this rusty brownish water bottles. So this is basically different types of iron and steel and whatever metal oxides diluted into water, and then they were retained in the sediment pond near the Gulf of Finland. And after it has this water has settled down, then this water was discharged to sea. So then the conditions were kind of less dangerous, at least looked at least less dangerous. However, nobody actually thought that the water that was discharged was with very high salinity, or at least comparatively high salinity to the salinity in the Gulf of Finland. But that's just a side story. So what about stakeholder dialogue and damage compensation for Nord Stream 1? In fact, as I said, it was moderately and relatively successful because EIA and consultations were carried out in accordance with ESPO. Helcom was informed about the whole project, but still avoided to be actively engaged in EIA process because that was a sister convention that carried out the EIA. A regular post-project monitoring was established, and I already mentioned that. 2 compensation funds were created in Germany, and that was a national and international foundations, both are still operating. And that was a so-called extrajudicial conciliation settlement. So parties agreed before going to court that Nord Stream and Gazprom will establish and replenish funds that will be independent from those companies, and that would operate to compensate for damages caused by the construction of Nord Stream 1 across the whole Baltic Sea. As a side effect, we can also say that Ingermalanski Nature Reserve, the marine reserve established in the Eastern Gulf of Finland, or it's even called Eastern Gulf of Finland, probably in Russia now, it has been finally established, and that was the promise also from Nord Stream 1. Though it has been established 7 years after the project has begun. And also important that, and I hope you see it at the bottom of the slide, that Nord Stream already by that time announced that the new 2 pipelines for Nord Stream 2 are planned to be established exactly in the same corridor as Nord Stream 1. And that should be remembered, because after several years, it appeared clear that that was just a promise. So Nord Stream and Gazprom decided that they can build a new pipeline, not exactly by the same route, because of simple reasons. They felt that there is less, perhaps, economy in that corridor. So they wanted to make it cheaper. But of course, they had a lot of slogans again, and when we see the actions, they are not really exactly following those slogans and promises. And if we have a closer look, remember the promise. They wanted to have the 2 new pipelines in the same corridor, and this is the original Nord Stream 1 corridor, the green line. However, as I said, for some reasons, they decided that they should make it different and lay it from the southern coast of the Gulf of Finland. And yeah, so they also claimed that there were informed decisions and they know everything about the nature values across the Baltic Sea, and especially in the landslide area on the Russian side as well as on the German side. And we quite clearly see that this is not the case. Even if you look at the green corridor, the original corridor that avoids passing by any of the protected areas, you see on the actual selected extension of Nord Stream, they made and built the pipelines across protected area. So here it is. And that is why we basically can say in memoriam of Kurgalski Nature Reserve, because as I already mentioned, this is a unique and probably the best preserved natural area in the Gulf of Finland, along the coast of the Gulf of Finland. And this is protected by 2 conventions, by Ramsar Convention of Wetlands of International Importance and by Helsinki Convention. And it is, of course, also protected by the Russian national law. However, nobody, among especially managers and developers of the project cared about that. So, because they had a recipe, a simple recipe, how to kill several flies with just 1 shot. And they did it very easily. And again, coming back to the enforcement of environmental laws, unfortunately, this is the similarity with many other countries, that money matters. And so what they did, they changed and softened protection mode of the reserve. And that is, surprise, surprise, coincided with the start of the construction works. They ignored or replaced inconvenient scientific data and started preparatory works before formal permission for EIA was granted. And they just forgot about the cumulative impact and zero solution alternative. So they forgot about the total impact that this project would cause on the environment. They only cared about this 2-kilometer stretch across Kurgalski Peninsula, and that was the key point in their argumentation why it should go here and not there. This is how it looked after all. Well, perhaps right now the route looks a little bit different, but nevertheless, this is how it quite cruelly looked several years ago when the route has been constructed, both across the very unique polder area and marsh area, the Kadar Bog at Kurgalski Peninsula, across the dune area and the pine forest in the dune area, and across all different types of red-listed plants, mosses and lichens that are and were observed in the area. Yeah, just to pay also a tribute to the author of these pictures, I think it was Evgeny Usov, a Greenpeace photographer from St. Petersburg, who took those. And unfortunately, Evgeny has passed away the past January. So, was it result-based management? Apparently not. I think the only outcome of the public outreach and public participation in this process was that we managed to convince Ramsar Convention to come up with a special mission addressing the problems identified by public in this project, and they have visited the site. Unfortunately, that was already like 2 years after the construction works have been carried out. And of course, they called for better transparency and better enforcement of the international treaties and better compliance with the international treaties. However, all of those were just recommendations. And unfortunately, as I said, with the enforcement, there are plenty of problems that are not really taken into account. And yeah, sorry, I think I'm moving quite slowly, but I still have 2 cases to present to you. Then yet again, we've got another case, and that was in Poland. And that is Vistula Spit Canal that I already mentioned to you. It is a long-lasting strategic and political project that was driven by Polish government, and especially the nationalist Polish government that was in power for several years now, and it used to be in power earlier. So for them, they always claimed there should be transport. The project is aiming at transport independence of one port that is not really developed in Vistula Lagoon. That was, and the traffic, shipping traffic to this port is right now blocked by the navigation through the lagoon, because the lagoon is transboundary with Russia, and ships should arrive to this port via the lagoon, and that's of course a distance. But then secondly, it's also a disruption by Russian authorities. However, when the actual decision about the construction of the canal came into force, it became very clear that this is not about transport independence, this is about national security. And there were 3 alternative routes considered for this construction, and all of them were equally worse, equally bad, with extremely poor consideration again of the cumulative impacts and cumulative effects and consequences to both the spit itself, but also to the lagoon. In a nutshell, it would mean that there will be an opening through the spit quite close to its start, and then this opening, despite of the locks that will be put, and you can see that on the bottom picture, despite of the locks, of course, there will be an inflow of salty water into quite brackish lagoon, and by that, inevitably changing the lagoon ecosystem. And there was also a very distinct destruction of the coherence of the entirety of 2 Natura 2000 areas, and that is the spit and the lagoon itself. Unfortunately, again, in this case, no alternatives were properly assessed, and one of the alternatives that was pushed forward by many critics of this project was that inland navigation routes could have been re-established, connecting this very small port with much bigger port of Gdańsk through canals and navigation channels, and also rivers here in this very dense river area close to Gdańsk, or between Gdańsk and Elbląg. Sorry. So what has happened with Vistula Spit with regards to international agreements? In 2016, Poland informed HELCOM that environmental impact assessment will be implemented in accordance to ESPO Convention, and of course it was not. In 2019, the logging of the dune has started the next day after the permit for the construction was granted. And in 2020, only after the construction has started and logging, this, as you can see, devastating logging across the dune and across the spit has started, Poland informed HELCOM, but not Russia as a neighboring country. And of course, the logic here is that, of course, Russia is not a party of the ESPO Convention. Why should we? But apparently that was not the only reason, of course. And again, the environmental impact assessment conclusion was if all mitigation measures will be implemented, then the impacts will be insignificant or negligible. And that has never been proved by any other external experts. However, 2 of the Polish NGOs, Greenpeace Poland and Eka Unia, they have filed a complaint and submitted it to the European Court of Justice, and that is under consideration right now. So we really hope and cross our fingers that this will be resolved through the court procedure, because there are very clear violations of the environmental law, both the European directives as well as national law, and of course 2 of the conventions, both Helsinki Convention as well as ESPO Convention. However, well, as a side effect or side step or side whatever you call it, bouncing back result of the whole process was that Polish NGOs were accused of supporting Russian interests and being more or less spies for Russia, and that's of course is a really complete nonsense. Well, briefly going through the principles of the international law, that how they command, how they require that in case of such projects, in case of such large infrastructure development, parties and countries and developers themselves should inform neighbors about expected environmental impacts. Starting with Helsinki Convention and HELCOM procedures. So even by the definition in the convention itself, precautionary principle sets that precautionary principle should apply to take preventive measures when there is a reason to assume that substances or energy introduced directly or indirectly into marine environment may create hazards to human health, harm living organisms and marine ecosystems. And that's the guiding principle for why EIA, why environmental impact assessment, and why consultations should be carried out. And then there is a clear also definition about transboundary effects, and that each contracting party should use their best endeavors and use their best knowledge to ensure that the implementation of the convention does not cause transboundary pollution. And if such transboundary effects will occur, then they should consult with each other. And there is an article about environmental impact assessment and when and how it should be applied, and when and how contracting parties also, or countries in HELCOM area, should coordinate and communicate about potential transboundary effects. And also that the compensation should be done to nature conservation goals, to compensate for damage caused by any of these large developments. And ESPO Convention likewise requires an environmental impact in transboundary contexts. And parties of the convention take all appropriate and effective measures to prevent, reduce, and control significant adverse transboundary impacts. And there are distinctions between parties of origin and parties of affected parties. And of course, if you look into the list of activities that fall under the jurisdiction of ESPO Convention, here is just an example of large diameter oil and gas pipelines, but of course, port development, navigation canals of strategic importance, they also fall under the same consideration and the same requirements. And finally, also, ESPO Convention clearly defines how different bodies, including public, including stakeholders, should be able to participate in EIA processes. And that actually also refers to, for example, MSP and Maritime Spatial Planning and ICZM, that they should apply to this type of strategic documents. And there are also other documents that are defining EIA in cases of, for example, development strategies. And these are both defined here in the ESPO Convention, but also in relevant EU directives, EIA Directive and Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive. But finally, also a few words about one more project and one more case that came into our attention quite recently. And that's so-called Lenette Holm, or Lenette Holmen, an artificial island, reclaimed island in front of Copenhagen harbor. I managed to find nice slides about it, and you can see the whole presentation, but this is very pro. So it's not about the impacts, but it's very pro the project. So you'll see the link there in my presentation. And this is how it would look like. So this area that is shown here on the map, this will be completely new reclaimed area with soil and sediments placed here to fill in the land area. The existing area is actually here. And for example, there is a big wastewater treatment plant located currently on this site that also would need to be moved away, in fact. And there are very nice and good aims for the project. So it claims that it will secure the harbor against storms and will secure against raised sea level due to climate change. So, well, as you can imagine, this could be easily sold to the parliamentarians. It will also store 2.6 million tons of soil surplus per year produced by the building industry in this region of Denmark. And it will create a new urban district for growing urban population in Copenhagen. But all in all, when we talk about this project, it is about the last bullet. So it is about residential area that will be constructed, in fact. This is how it will look like. So this will be this artificial island created. And this is also from the same presentation demonstrating how the coastal line of Copenhagen has developed within the recent, well, 500, 600 years. You see the coastline in 1500. You see how it looked like in 17th and beginning of 18th century. You see how it looked like in 19th century with the industrialization and port development. And you see how it has developed within the 20th and 21st century, what are the plans and how it will affect the coastline. So the port was apparently growing, of course. But why people are protesting? And there are really strong protests in Denmark against the project. Well, to those who are reading Scandinavian, Swedish, or Danish, well, they can read, of course, in the newspapers. You can also just Google or search on YouTube for Lenette Holm, and you'll receive plenty of videos demonstrating people opposing the project. But in a nutshell, what's wrong? So I tried to put it into a couple of bullets here. And there are obvious impacts, but those perhaps are not really that important. However, well, one may say those are, because there will be traffic congestion for construction purposes. And the construction is planned for 30 years. So for 30 years, there will be a constant truck flow across the city of Copenhagen with trucks carrying soil to place it into the reclamation area. So basically to construct the island. 30 years of congestion and 30 years of emissions into the atmosphere. I wonder if that claims, or if that could be comparable to the climate effects that will be achieved with protection of the municipality of Copenhagen against storms and water rise. The second obvious is disturbance of seabed and dumping of sediments because of dredging and reclamation. And there are assessments demonstrating that there will be quite extensive mud spills and flocks along the whole coastline and all the way down to Sweden. But what is also very important, and that is probably the importance of the project for the whole Baltic Sea, so that this artificial island is located just in the middle of one of the 3 deep sea channels in Öresund. So there will be obstruction of the water inflow, salty water inflow, fresh water, fresh oxygenated water inflow into the Baltic Sea. Of course, that will not be in a magnitude of like 10%, it will be below 1%, but nevertheless, for the Baltic Sea, more or less each kilo or each ton of oxygen that is brought to the sea matters a lot. So environmental impacts of Lenette Holm project are far beyond the area of the construction site in Öresund, and multilateral transboundary EIA carried out in line with ESPO conventions needs to be arranged. And again, surprise, surprise, Denmark acted as an individual country and they only consulted with Sweden as the neighbors. They even claimed that according to their consideration, the ESPO convention should not be applied because there will not be there won't be any transboundary effects of this project. However, Sweden has been constantly very negative towards the project for many reasons, including that dumping and mud flows will affect Swedish Natura 2000 areas. And yeah, of course, it contradicts also with the Helsinki Convention and ESPO Convention obligations and EU directives. I will not talk about this, no worries, but I just wanted to demonstrate to you that besides these coastal infrastructure projects that I referred to, there could be a lot of other activities and a lot of other industries that will be affecting Baltic Sea. And in that respect, MSP is the tool. And I think Natalie has mentioned aquaculture, and this is an example of aquaculture placed in the Gulf of Finland without any at all environmental consideration. I strongly suspect that there was no EIA procedure whatsoever carried out, and this is just one of the farms placed in the Russian part of the Gulf of Finland. Leading to, for example, what is showing on the left-hand side with escapees of rainbow trout establishing populations in the rivers of Leningrad Oblast. Port development, quite another aspect. And this is a picture from this year, summer in Ust-Luga, where a new terminal was established for iron ore transshipment. And that caused quite obvious contamination. And I think that the development of Ust-Luga port has never been also properly considered in accordance with MSP and ecosystem-based management principles. Okay, that was it from me.